with a smile that never reached her eyes. Julian gave her a sharp look. She came highly recommended. Let's focus. The meeting unfolded in 2 languages. Each sentence a tightrope walk across legal jargon, cultural nuance, and strategic ambiguity. Arya's voice remained calm, her translations seamless. But as the hours passed, she sensed something underneath it all, an edge in Julian's questions. Hesitation in certain figures, a subtle tension in the Mandarin drafts that didn't match the English versions. She flagged 2 small discrepancies, and Julian nodded approvingly. When the meeting ended, chairs slid back and murmurs filled the room. As Arya gathered her tablet, she heard Celeste lean toward Julian and whisper, "I found something about her mother. You need to see it." Arya's heart stopped, just for a beat. She kept walking, out of the room and down the corridor, her mind racing. Her mother, the one name she had buried beneath years of quiet reinvention. That night, alone in her hotel suite, Arya stared out at the Tokyo skyline. Somewhere in this glowing web of power, someone was reaching into the past, and that past had claws. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. 1 message. East Garden Pavilion, Temple of Silence. Midnight. Come alone. The Temple of Silence was closed to the public at night, but the message had come with an access pass and a code. Arya hesitated only once before stepping through the old wooden gate and walking the stone path between moonlit sakura trees. The pavilion stood at the far end, ancient, quiet, sacred. A man stood at the edge, facing the koi pond. He wore a dark coat and no tie. When she approached, he didn't turn. "I held you once, when you were 3 days old," he said in Japanese. "Your mother was sleeping. I made a promise." Arya froze. The voice. Slowly, he turned. The face was older, thinner, but the eyes, her eyes, were the same. "You can't be," she said, her voice barely more than breath. "My father died in a fire. There was a funeral, there was a casket, there was no body," he said gently. She stepped back, trembling. "Kenji Mori died that day," he continued, "but I survived. I had to disappear, to protect you and Mako." Tears stung her eyes. "You left us. You let her raise me alone. Let her suffer, get sick. I never stopped helping," he said, stepping closer but not touching her. "Who do you think paid for her experimental treatment? The scholarships, the specialists?" Dr. Wolf said. "He lied," Kenji said quietly. "He used my help to manipulate you. He's not a doctor anymore. He launders money through his fake clinics. The same way your grandfather and Thomas Granger did." Arya collapsed onto the bench. "Why now?" she asked. "Because Mercer International is about to finalize a partnership with a shell company controlled by the same men who destroyed your mother's life. The documents you're translating, they're the key." She looked at him. "I need you," he said, "to expose them, to clear your mother's name." She stood. "I don't even know you." "You will," he said, handing her a flash drive. "Start here." 2 days later, Julian Mercer stood at the window of his office, the Tokyo skyline behind him. His expression was tense. On his desk, 2 sets of contracts lay side by side, English and Japanese. Arya's voice echoed in his mind. "These figures don't match." She was right. He walked to the server room alone. The IT director was already waiting. "Back up the contract databases," Julian ordered. "Offline storage, and restrict all access from Thomas Granger's credentials." "You're expecting trouble?" the director asked. "I'm expecting exposure," Julian replied. Celeste Granger poured herself a glass of whiskey, her fingers trembling. Her father, Thomas, had just been summoned by U.S. investigators. Someone had leaked internal reports, wire transfers, shell companies, old audit trails. She turned to the screen. Arya Tanaka's personnel file glowed under the blue light. "Daughter of Mako Tanaka," she murmured. "Suspected embezzler." She clicked a video file, surveillance footage of Arya meeting a man in Tokyo. A man who should have been dead. Kenji Mori. Celeste picked up her phone. "We have a problem," she told Wolf. "The girl's not who we thought." Julian confronted Arya the next morning. You lied, he said, eyes cold. You knew who you were. You knew your mother's story. Arya didn't deny it. And you, she replied, voice shaking, knew your father and Thomas Granger built this company on lies. He flinched. Why are you here, Arya? To finish what my mother started. To end this. Julian stared at her, something breaking behind his eyes. Then let's do it together. At the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, a press room was prepared. Behind the scenes, Julian Mercer reviewed the evidence. Thomas Granger and Dr. Wolfe were being detained. Celeste had disappeared. Kenji stood beside Arya, his suit crisp, his posture dignified. Julian entered last, wearing a black suit and no tie. His voice filled the room. My name is Julian Mercer. I am the CEO of Mercer International. Today, I am here not to defend this company, but to rebuild it. The truth matters, even when it costs everything. He paused, looking at Arya. This young woman's mother was framed by my predecessors. I intend to make it right. The room fell silent. Then the flashbulbs began. Outside the hotel, Arya stood alone for a moment. The wind tugged at her coat. Julian stepped beside her. You didn't have to stay, he said softly. I did, she replied. He looked at her. I never believed in legacies, he said, but maybe we can build one that's worth it. She didn't speak, but when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. The press conference echoed in Arya's mind long after the last flashbulb faded. Julian Mercer had stood beside her father, and admitted to the world what few men in his position would ever dare, that his family's fortune had been built on a lie. That the company he now led had roots soaked in deceit. The fallout had begun immediately. Stockholders panicked, regulators swarmed, and every major business channel ran headlines that stretched the full width of their screens. Mercer International, the golden child of multinational finance, was under investigation, but the truth, at last, was free, for the first time in years. Arya slept soundly, only to be jolted awake the next morning by the shrill ring of her phone. She sat up, heart already pounding. Ethan, she answered, recognizing the number of Julian's younger brother. They've taken her, came his voice, tight and shaking. Arya didn't need to ask who. Where? A facility, somewhere in Hokkaido. Dr. Wolfe's people moved her late last night. They claimed she needed further treatment. But I checked the authorization. It's forged, and Julian's access to internal systems was locked out at 3 a.m. Arya swung out of bed. What about the security feeds? Wiped. They used a blackout protocol from Thomas Granger's old account. But I've got a lead. One of the transport vans was spotted on a private toll road east of Sapporo. She was already packing. Julian, still with federal agents. They're interrogating Granger today. I didn't want to risk contact until I was sure. Arya paused. We have to move. We can't leave her alone again. Agreed. I've booked us on a charter. We leave in 2 hours. As she zipped her bag, her father emerged from the suite's adjoining room. Already dressed. They've taken Meiko again, she told him. We're going to get her back. Kenji Mori's face tightened. Then we leave now. The charter flight to Hokkaido was quiet. Tense. Ethan sat by the window, scanning satellite images and private traffic networks. Arya stared straight ahead. The flash drive her father had given her clutched in her palm. The device had already opened dozens of doors, offshore accounts, contract mismatches, internal memos dating back over 2 decades. But none of it mattered now. Not if her mother was in danger again. They landed under gray skies, wind slapping hard against the tarmac. A black SUV waited at the edge of the private hangar. Kenji took the wheel without question. The facility, when they reached it, was nestled into a forest clearing. Glass and concrete nestled beneath snow-dusted pines. It looked more like a luxury retreat than a private medical center. 2 men in dark uniforms stood at the gate. Kenji rolled down the window. We're here to see Meiko Tanaka. She's not receiving visitors. One guard replied smoothly. She's my wife, Kenji said, and she's here under false pretenses. The guard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then I suggest you take that up with Dr. Wolfe. Ethan tapped something on his phone. Seconds later, the man's earpiece buzzed. He listened, paused, then opened the gate without another word. "What did you do?" Arya whispered. "Federal agents can be very persuasive." Ethan replied. Inside, the corridors were spotless. Too clean, too quiet. They were led to a private suite at the far end. A nurse opened the door without a word. And there she was. Mako Tanaka, thinner, paler, but unmistakably alert. She sat in a chair by the window, eyes widening as Arya entered. "Mom," Arya breathed. Crossing the room, "Arya," Mako whispered, reaching for her hand. "I knew you'd come." Kenji knelt beside her. "I'm sorry, Mako, for all of it." She looked at him with something between grief and forgiveness. "You chose the only path you could. Now we choose together." Ethan stepped away to make the call. "She's safe," he said into the phone. "We're bringing her home." Back in Tokyo, chaos was unfolding. Thomas Granger had gone silent during questioning, invoking legal privilege. Celeste, still missing, had triggered alerts in airports across Asia, and Dr. Wolf had disappeared. Julian watched the surveillance feed from his office, the tension in his shoulders unreadable. For all his public contrition, he was still a man used to control. And now, control was slipping again. His assistant knocked once. Entered. Interpol just issued a red notice for Wolf. He crossed into Macau an hour ago. Julian nodded. "Increase the bounty. Triple it." The assistant hesitated. "Some of the board members are uncomfortable with how far you're going." Julian turned to him, eyes like ice. "Let them be uncomfortable." When Arya returned, the hug Julian gave her was longer than necessary, tighter than expected. "She's safe," Arya said softly. "Thank God." Mako was moved to a secure floor in a Tokyo hospital, under government protection. Kenji refused to leave her side. Arya returned to work. Because the fallout wasn't finished. The documents Julian had submitted had only scratched the surface. Arya began combing through the flash drive, translating years of buried correspondence. Memo after memo, she uncovered deliberate financial misstatements, fraudulent audits, doctored balance sheets. The trail of deception led back not just to Thomas Granger, but to foreign investors, political donors, even non-profit arms used to launder donations. One file stood out. A letter, dated 15 years prior, from Richard Granger, Celeste's grandfather, to Kenneth Mercer. In it, he outlined a plan to use Mercer International's expansion into East Asia to create a network of shell companies that would cycle illicit profits through development initiatives. Arya's hands shook as she read it. This wasn't just business. This was empire, built on exploitation. She sent it to Ethan, who forwarded it to the FBI. Julian walked in just as she hit send. "You're still working," he said quietly. "I have to." He moved closer. "You've done enough." "No," she said, turning to him. "We've only just begun." Julian nodded. Then his phone buzzed. He read the message, face darkening. "Interpol found Wolf," he said. "Where?" "Beijing. He's booked a charter out of the country. We have 2 hours. We go," Arya said. They landed just after midnight. The address Interpol provided was an apartment above a closed clinic. When they arrived, the building was dark, but not empty. Julian entered first, Arya close behind. They found Wolf in the back office, packing files into a leather case. He looked up. "Julian, I should have known. You always underestimate people," Julian said. Wolf glanced at Arya. "And you, just like your mother, smart, but too sentimental. She trusted you," Arya said. "That was her mistake." Julian stepped forward. "This is over, Wolf." "Not yet," Wolf said, reaching for something in his jacket. Julian lunged. They struggled. The gun clattered to the floor. Wolf shoved Julian back, only for Arya to grab the weapon. "Don't move," she said, voice shaking. Wolf froze. Julian stood, breathing hard. Sirens echoed in the distance. When Interpol arrived, Wolf was waiting, handcuffed to his own desk. On the flight home, Arya stared out the window. Julian sat beside her, silent. He wanted to burn it all down. she whispered. Julian nodded. He almost did. Back in Tokyo, Mako's condition worsened. The years of stress, illness, and silence had taken their toll. Arya sat by her side each day, reading documents aloud, playing quiet music, sometimes just holding her hand. One evening, Mako opened her eyes. "Arya, I'm here." She looked at her daughter, then at Kenji. "I was never afraid," she said, "only sorry, I couldn't give you more." "You gave everything," Arya said, tears falling. "You gave her strength," Kenji added. "She gave us justice." Mako smiled, then closed her eyes for the final time. The funeral was quiet, dignified, held in the hills overlooking Kyoto, where Mako had once dreamed of retiring. Julian stood beside Arya, silent as she delivered a short eulogy. "She taught me silence could be strength," Arya said, "but today, I choose to speak." Afterward, Kenji remained by the grave. Arya walked with Julian through the forest path. "She changed everything," he said. "So did you," she replied. Julian stopped. "Come with me, full-time, head of ethics, not just for language, for truth." Arya looked at him. "I'm not a lawyer. You're better. You care." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'm in." 1 week later, Celeste Granger was apprehended in Dubai. She'd been planning to move funds from one of the last remaining offshore accounts. The news made headlines for 3 days straight. Julian didn't react. He was in a boardroom, restructuring the company charter. When Arya entered, he looked up and smiled. "Ready for round 2?" he asked. She returned the smile. "Always." They stood, shoulder to shoulder, preparing for what came next. Because the shadows might stretch deep. But the light was rising. The morning after Celeste Granger's arrest was unusually quiet inside Mercer Tower. The usual buzz of assistants, advisors, and legal teams had dulled to whispers. The name, Granger, hung in the air like a storm cloud that refused to pass. On the 63rd floor, in a private conference room far from the executive wing, Arya Tanaka sat across from a stern-faced panel of lawyers and ethics officers. Julian Mercer stood behind her, arms crossed, silent. "We need to understand your full involvement, Miss Tanaka," one of the lawyers said. His tone was courteous but clipped. "You withheld your identity when you joined the company. You had personal motivations related to your mother's case. Motivations that could have jeopardized the neutrality of your position." Arya didn't flinch. "I didn't hide my identity. I protected it. There's a difference. And I didn't jeopardize anything. I exposed a criminal empire that had been running under Mercer's nose for decades." The room fell quiet. Julian stepped forward. "Arya acted on my authority. Any decision she made, any file she accessed, was either with my knowledge or by my direct request." The lead attorney tapped his pen. "This company can't afford more scandal." Julian nodded. "Then perhaps you should be more concerned with how we're still uncovering fraud in our Singapore branch. Or the political slush fund discovered in the Zurich office last night." Arya looked at him in surprise. He hadn't told her. Julian met her eyes briefly. The rabbit hole goes deeper. The meeting ended with tense nods and vague threats of internal review. But Arya didn't care. The battle was already shifting. Back in her office, Ethan Mercer was waiting. "I need you both to see this," he said, locking the door behind him. He slid a tablet across the desk. Arya tapped the screen. Footage played, grainy, time-stamped from 5 days earlier. It showed Celeste Granger at a private airport in Dubai, speaking to an unidentified man. The audio was poor, but one name cut through clearly. Richard Blackthorne. Arya blinked. That name again. Julian sat down slowly. "He was one of my father's original partners. Before Thomas Granger, before the expansion into Asia. I thought he was dead." "He's not," Ethan said. "Interpol thinks he's the one who moved Wolf's money. They traced a secondary vault in the Caymans. He's still active, still pulling strings. Which means," Arya said carefully, "that Celeste's arrest wasn't the end. It was just a warning shot." Julian leaned back. "This doesn't stop unless we finish it. Every route, every name, They flew to London that night under the guise of meeting with European investors. In truth, they were following a financial trail that led to an unassuming building in Mayfair, a legal firm known for representing untouchables. Ethan had secured a meeting using his middle name and Mercer credentials. Inside the marble-floored lobby, they were greeted by a well-dressed woman in her 50s. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "and guest, please follow me." She led him to a private elevator and up 3 floors. The office was dark-paneled and quiet. The man waiting behind the desk looked like he'd stepped out of a photograph from the 1960s. 3-piece suit, cufflinks, a gaze like a scalpel. "Julian," he said, "you look more like Kenneth every year." "I'm not my father," Julian replied. "No," the man said, smiling thinly, "you're more dangerous." He understood limits. Arya watched them carefully. This was the man behind the curtain. "You used Wolf. You used Thomas. You used Celeste," Julian said, "and now you'll face the consequences." Richard Blackthorne chuckled. "You've always been so dramatic." He stood, walked to the window. "This company, your empire, was built with my money, my contacts, my methods. You may have thrown a press conference, but the system still obeys me." Arya stepped forward. "Not anymore." Blackthorne turned, studying her. "You're the Tanaka girl, the one who stirred up this little rebellion. Do you really think the world cares about your mother's name? They care about dividends, about stock prices. We're rewriting the system," Julian said, "and if that costs the fortune my father left behind, so be it." Blackthorne's smile faded. "You've made your choice, then." Julian nodded. "So have I." By the time they left the building, Blackthorne's attorneys had already issued cease and desist threats to the Mercer board. And journalists had been leaked photos of Julian and Arya together in London. Implied scandal, personal bias, and conflict of interest. The headlines the next morning were brutal. Julian Mercer in ethical firestorm over relationship with ex-translator. Insider romance undermines corporate reform. But Arya didn't flinch. She stood with Julian on the steps of the Mercer London office and read a prepared statement. "I am not ashamed of my history. I am not ashamed of my relationship with Julian Mercer. What I am ashamed of is how long this company was allowed to operate under a veil of corruption. That ends now." That night, someone threw a rock through the window of Arya's Tokyo apartment. No note, just shattered glass and silence. Kenji insisted she stay in a secured suite until things calmed down. Julian doubled her protection detail. 2 days later, Ethan discovered something buried in the Cayman files. A set of payments made to a biotech company registered in Switzerland. And within that, medical research, experimental cardiac treatment. The same treatments Mako had received. The same trial Wolf had claimed he created. The funding had come from Mercer money. And the research? It was stolen from a woman named Dr. Camille Roussel, a French scientist who'd vanished 5 years earlier. Julian stared at the document. "He killed her," he whispered. Arya felt the breath leave her body. "And used her work on my mother." The silence in the room was deafening. "This isn't just fraud," Julian said. "This is murder." They flew to Geneva to find Camille's last known contact, her sister, Eloise. She lived alone in a lakeside cottage, tending to her late sister's garden. At first, she refused to speak, but when Arya showed her the medical records, the signatures forged in Wolf's hand, she broke down. "I tried for years," she whispered. "No one believed me. They said Camille disappeared for money. But she'd never leave her research." "She didn't," Arya said. "It was taken." Eloise gave them the final piece, an encrypted USB Camille had left behind. Inside was the original treatment protocol. Dated, time-stamped, legally protected. They had the smoking gun. But time was running out. Back in Tokyo, Ethan warned that Blackthorne had begun buying influence on the Mercer board. Old allies were flipping. Pressure was mounting for Julian to resign. At the same time, Japanese authorities announced a review of Arya's work visa. They were being squeezed from all sides. Julian called an emergency board meeting. He walked into the room with Arya by his side. "I will not step down," he said, but I will change how we lead. He proposed a dual executive structure. Arya would oversee the Ethics and Compliance Division independently, reporting to an external commission. He pledged full transparency of all international accounts, and published the Camille Roussel file in a live-streamed press conference. It was the most radical move in Mercer's history. And it worked. Public opinion turned, investors stabilized, and Blackthorne's influence cracked. One of his men flipped. Wolf was extradited, and Eloise Roussel filed a lawsuit so large it made headlines in 6 countries. In the quiet after the storm, Arya returned to Kyoto for a final visit to her mother's grave. Kenji walked beside her. "You know," he said, "your mother used to say silence could be powerful. But you've shown me something else. Sometimes, silence is just a cage." Arya placed a single camellia on the stone. She doesn't have to be silent anymore. Behind them, Julian waited in the car. He looked tired, but resolved. He stepped out when Arya approached. "Everything's in motion," he said. "We're going to lose some things. Maybe even friends." "We already did," she replied. "But we found something better," he said. She tilted her head. "What's that?" "The truth," he said, "and each other." She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. As the sun set behind the Kyoto hills, and the wind rustled through the trees, Arya felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. But peace never lasted, because in a shadowed office in Singapore, Richard Blackthorne opened a new file. And smiled. The first spark came not from an email or a press release, but from a whisper overheard in a luxury hotel bar in Singapore. 2 executives from an energy conglomerate, deep in conversation, casually mentioned that Mercer International's board might soon be replaced by a shadow group of old money. By morning, the whisper had become a rumor, and by afternoon, the rumor had made the front page of 3 financial dailies across Asia. Arya Tanaka sat across from Julian Mercer in their Tokyo war room. A bare conference room turned into a crisis command center. On the wall behind them, a digital map lit up with dots, locations of Mercer subsidiaries. Flagged legal cases, pending compliance reviews, media activity spikes. Each glowing point marked a fault line beneath their feet. "We're not just fighting PR anymore," Ethan Mercer said, tapping a stylus against the map. "This is coordinated, legal, financial, cyber. They're trying to fracture us from every angle." Julian leaned forward, staring at the data. His jaw was set, but Arya saw the storm behind his eyes. "How many board members are vulnerable?" 3 already signed letters of no confidence. 2 more are rumored to be wavering. Ethan replied. "If we lose 6, we lose the vote," Arya said. "They'll force you out. They won't get the chance." Julian replied, standing. "We go on offense." An hour later, Mercer International held an emergency shareholder meeting. It was virtual, streamed live to investors and analysts worldwide. Julian stood in front of the camera without a tie. Sleeves rolled. The image of a man with nothing to hide. "What you've seen over the past 6 months is not a fall from grace. It's a cleansing fire," he began. "Yes, we've lost money. Yes, we've uncovered corruption. That is what accountability looks like. We are not covering it up. We are rooting it out." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I am not my father. And Mercer is not a front for criminal wealth. Not anymore." The feed cut to Arya, who presented newly declassified files, evidence of shell companies used by the old guard to funnel profits through illegal trades. Arms shipments disguised as logistics deals. Biotech patents stolen and sold under shell firms. Her voice was calm, even when her hands shook behind the podium. By the end of the stream, investor sentiment had swung back, just slightly, but enough to stall the board vote, enough to buy them time. That night, Julian received a private call. Unlisted number. "Did you really think this is about money?" Blackthorne's voice was low, almost amused. "You could burn the company to the ground and I'd still win." "What do you want?" Julian asked. "Legacy. My name buried beneath your empire. Immortal, the same way Kenneth wanted it. I'm not him." Blackthorne chuckled. But you are, Julian. You just don't see it yet. The line went dead. Julian stared at the screen for a long time before deleting the call log. The next morning, their Zurich bank froze 3 company accounts without warning. 48 hours later, Mercer's East African operations were hit with simultaneous lawsuits, bogus, but well-funded. By the end of the week, their cybersecurity team reported a breach attempt sourced from a firm owned by Blackthorne's nephew. The war had begun. Arya spent every waking hour decoding internal records, matching signatures, tracing financial trails backward through years of obfuscation. She found patterns others missed, certain dates, project names, dummy companies linked by subtle linguistic fingerprints, a single word used in multiple fake documents, an archaic Japanese accounting term, used only by one professor, Wolf's mentor. When she presented the findings to Julian and Ethan, the room fell into a tense silence. He was laundering money before your father even entered the game, she said. Julian stared at the files. How many more are there? Enough to rewrite your family's entire history. That night, Kenji Mori visited Arya alone. He looked older than she remembered, wearier, but his voice was steady. You know what happens next, don't you? He asked. They come for us. He nodded. They won't use lawyers. They'll use knives. Arya's phone buzzed. A single message. Anonymous. Get out now. You have 48 hours. She didn't show it to Julian. Instead, she brought him tea, and they sat in silence on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the lights of Tokyo blink like constellations across steel and glass. I'm tired, he said quietly. I know. He looked at her. We were supposed to fix this. We still can, she said, but only if we hold. He turned away. What if holding means losing everything? She reached for his hand. Then we rebuild, from ashes, if we have to. The next day, Julian flew to Washington for a private Senate hearing on global corporate crime. Arya stayed behind to oversee operations in Tokyo. While he was in the air, Mercer's main data center in Geneva went offline. Not a glitch, a coordinated power cut, followed by a physical break-in. Servers destroyed, backups gone. Ethan called her at 3 a.m. They're erasing us. By the time Julian landed, 2 of the remaining board members had resigned. Arya met him on the tarmac. We have one option left, she said. Blow the door open. Julian looked at her. You mean, full release? She nodded. Every file, every name. The world deserves the truth. He hesitated. It'll burn everyone. Then let it burn. They uploaded the archive at sunrise. Thousands of files, letters, memos, photos, contracts, names, a legacy of fire, offered freely to the public. It was the digital equivalent of dropping a match in a room soaked with gasoline. The media exploded. Governments scrambled. CEOs denied, resigned, or disappeared. Interpol issued warrants for 6 former Mercer executives. And Blackthorne, he vanished. For 2 weeks, the company braced for collapse. And then something strange happened. People began to thank them. Victims of old scams, former whistleblowers, small businesses crushed by unethical practices. Julian received handwritten letters. Arya received donations from strangers, toward a new foundation she hadn't even launched yet. The tide was turning, but peace never lasted. One morning, Julian walked into his office and found a single item on his desk. A ring, his father's. He stared at it for a long time, then opened the drawer. Inside was a letter, in Blackthorne's handwriting. Your father wore this the day he swore to protect me. I thought it only fair you wear it when you decide whether to finish the job. I'm not hiding, I'm waiting. There was no return address. But there was a time. Midnight. And a location. Macau. Julian looked at Arya. He wants me to come alone. She shook her head. It's a trap. I know. I'm not letting you go. You won't have to, he said, because you're coming with me. The plane left that evening. They landed just after dark. The address was a private casino off the main strip, closed for renovation. Allegedly, inside, a single room remained lit. Julian entered first. Blackthorne stood at the window, a drink in hand. "I wondered if you'd show," he said. "I almost didn't. You brought her. She's why I'm still standing." Blackthorne turned. "Then let's finish this." He offered a drink. Julian didn't take it. Instead, he placed the ring on the table between them. "You think this is legacy?" Julian said. "But it's just a leash. You wear it long enough, it becomes a crown. I'd rather build something new." "You think the world forgives?" "It doesn't, it forgets. That's the only mercy left." "No," Arya said, stepping forward. "The only mercy is truth." Blackthorne studied her, then smiled. "I underestimated you." He raised his glass in mock salute, then drained it, and collapsed. Arya ran to his side, checked his pulse. "Alive," she said, barely. Paramedics arrived within minutes, called by Ethan, who had traced Julian's GPS signal and sent a shadow team to monitor them. Blackthorne survived. He was arrested under international law for conspiracy, racketeering, and corporate sabotage. Julian and Arya flew home in silence. 2 weeks later, the board reconvened, and for the first time in Mercer's history, they voted unanimously to start over. Julian stepped down as CEO. Arya took over the newly formed Integrity Council, and Mercer Industries became something no one expected: accountable, transparent, and finally, free. The rain fell steadily over Manhattan, painting the windows of Mercer Tower in streaks of gray. It was the kind of morning that demanded stillness. But inside the newly restructured Integrity Council chamber, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Arya Tanaka stood at the head of the table, her voice measured, deliberate. "This document proves that Richard Blackthorne didn't just finance Mercer's offshore operations. He kept a vault in Zurich, unaudited, off books, containing original ledgers, signatures, account trails, and even handwritten orders from Kenneth Mercer himself." Around her, members of the council leaned forward. Some were pale, others angry. The truth was spreading like a wildfire through the clean halls of the new Mercer, scorching everything left untouched in previous audits. Julian Mercer watched silently from the corner, no longer CEO, but still present, his influence no longer commanded by title, but by legacy, the good kind, forged in fire. This vault, Arya continued, was protected under diplomatic layers. But now that Blackthorne's assets are frozen, it's accessible. We've received approval from the Swiss Federal Tribunal. What's in it? Someone asked. She didn't blink. The final piece, the one thing that could bring down every remaining shell company, and the people behind them. A vote was cast, unanimous. Retrieve the contents of the vault. Ethan Mercer would accompany Arya. The next morning, they boarded a private jet bound for Zurich. Kenji Mori stood on the tarmac, watching his daughter through the rain-specked glass. He didn't speak, he just placed a hand on hers before she stepped aboard. No more warnings, no more plans, just trust. The flight was quiet. Arya stared out the window, her mind racing. The last vault, it sounded final, like the end of something, or someone. When they landed, 2 agents from Interpol met them. No words were exchanged as they were led into an underground facility, discreet, old, untouched by modern glass and steel. Inside the chamber, the air was cold, dusty. A biometric scanner hummed. Ethan placed his hand on the pad. A click, then another. The vault opened. Inside were 5 ledgers, a small black box, and 1 envelope, yellowed with time. Arya picked it up first. It was addressed to her. She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, dated 17 years ago. "Dearest Arya, if you're reading this, then the vault has finally been opened. I won't ask forgiveness, not for what I did, or didn't do. I only want you to know the truth. Your mother wasn't the only one they hurt. She was just the one who fought back. What I found in those ledgers terrified me. That's why I staged my death. Why I sent your father away. Why I kept you in the dark. If you continue on this path, you'll uncover everything, but you must be ready. Because what lies at the end of this trail isn't justice. It's sacrifice. Love always. Kenneth." Arya stood still, the words burning into her memory. Kenneth wrote this. Ethan asked quietly. She nodded. Julian's father, the architect, the coward, and now, perhaps, something more complicated. The black box contained hard drives. Password encrypted, but Ethan broke through them within an hour. What they found changed everything. Dozens of high-level contacts. World leaders, intelligence agents, names that had never appeared in any Mercer documentation. Because they weren't part of the company. They were above it, beside it, the true beneficiaries of the laundering. And among the documents, a directive. A fallback plan. If Mercer fell, these entities would activate their own silos. New companies, new money streams. The system would survive, just under new names. Cut off one head, Ethan muttered, and two more grow. Back in New York, Julian received their message. It was worse than they'd feared. And then, the bombshell. While they were still abroad, the Integrity Council building was raided. Not by police, by internal security, led by a board member Julian had once trusted, Gregory Haynes. An emergency vote had been called. They wanted to dissolve the council, claiming that the latest leaks violated national security. Julian returned immediately. Arya stayed behind. She couldn't leave, not yet. She had to trace the silos. From a rented apartment in Zurich, she began mapping names, networks, funding paths. She barely slept, barely ate. The work consumed her, until one night, a knock came at the door. A single envelope was slid beneath. No return address. Inside, photos of her, taken that week, and a note. You were warned. This is your final notice. Leave it buried. She didn't. She called Julian. They found me. He didn't hesitate. I'm coming. But when he arrived the next morning, Arya was gone. The apartment was empty. No signs of struggle. Just her notes, stacked neatly on the desk. And the letter from Kenneth, folded next to them. Julian's heart pounded. He checked the building's cameras. Offline. Ethan was already en route when the call came. I have her, a voice said. Blackthorne. From inside prison. Safe, for now. Julian was silent. I want the drives, Blackthorne said. You have 72 hours. Or you lose her. It wasn't desperation, it was control. Blackthorne still had reach, still had pieces on the board. Julian didn't speak. He hung up, and made a decision. He wouldn't trade the drives. He would finish it. The plan took shape quickly. Ethan contacted their allies, Interpol, whistleblower networks, even a hacker group once tied to Mercer's sabotage. They would release everything, all of it, and let the world judge. But Julian added one condition. He would go in, alone, to retrieve Arya. No police, no teams, just him. He flew to Geneva. Blackthorne had her in a facility deep in the mountains, disguised as a private clinic. Julian entered through the front, unarmed. The guards let him pass. Blackthorne was waiting in a library, flanked by two men. Arya sat in a chair, unharmed, but pale. Julian, she whispered. You look terrible, he said, smiling faintly. So do you. Blackthorne gestured. The drives? No. Blackthorne's smile faded. Then she dies. Julian stepped forward. No, she doesn't. From behind him, hidden microphones transmitted every word to a live stream. Ethan had activated it moments before. The world was watching. Governments, lawyers, journalists. Blackthorne's face twisted. You think this redeems you? No, Julian said. It buries you. The guards hesitated. One dropped his weapon. The other backed away. Blackthorne lunged. Julian moved faster. A struggle. A gunshot. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, Blackthorne lay bleeding. Julian knelt beside him. I won't let my father's name protect monsters anymore. Blackthorne smiled. Blood on his teeth. You think you've won? The system never dies. Then I'll keep burning it. Julian said. They left him there, alive, but exposed, utterly. The next days were a blur. Media chaos, legal frenzies, arrests, disgraced leaders resigning in waves. And Mercer, stripped, cut down, but standing, smaller, stronger, and cleaner. Months later, Aria stood before the Mercer Foundation's new building in Brooklyn. Behind her, a plaque bore Mako Tanaka's name. Julian joined her. He had a scar now, but peace in his eyes. "Is it over?" she asked. He looked at the city skyline. "For now." She took his hand. "Then let's build something new." And this time, they did. The air over New York carried a strange weight that morning, one not of tension, but of transition. After everything, the scandals, the revelations, the betrayals, and the bloodshed, the city stood still for a moment. Mercer Industries had survived, not untouched, not unbroken, but standing, nonetheless. Julian Mercer walked alone into the newly opened Mercer Foundation building in Brooklyn. Gone were the marble columns, the gold accents. The new space was built of warm woods and clean glass. It didn't demand attention, it welcomed it. He wore no suit, no tie, just a simple navy jacket and a warm gray shirt. The old uniform was gone, and so was the man who wore it. He entered a quiet room where children sat in a circle, learning Mandarin from a teacher with soft eyes and a voice full of rhythm. At the back of the room, Aria Tanaka stood smiling, her hand resting gently on her stomach. She was nearly 6 months pregnant now, and the glow people always spoke of was real. It came not from vanity or comfort, but peace earned after war. Julian stepped beside her. "Looks like your idea worked," he said. "It wasn't mine," she replied. "It was my mother's." They watched in silence for a while. The children repeated words, laughed, mispronounced tones and corrected each other without judgment. This was the future. The board had changed. The company had shrunk. Mercer now operated under a dual trust model, where ethical oversight wasn't a department, it was part of the core. The Fortune 500 title was gone, but so was the shadow legacy. Kenji Mori had returned to Tokyo to lead a regional education initiative, helping young students who had been displaced or forgotten by the global economy. He and Aria spoke weekly now, no longer as strangers, but as a father and daughter rebuilding slowly, like artisans restoring something ancient and fragile. Ethan Mercer had left the company entirely, turning down a lucrative tech position to write a book, a memoir, perhaps, or a warning. He said he hadn't decided, but every few weeks, he sent Julian new pages, and Julian read each one like scripture. The Integrity Council had become a model for other corporations. What was once an internal panel had become an international organization. They advised governments, trained compliance teams, and consulted NGOs. Aria led from the ground, not the podium. It had been nearly a year since the vault in Zurich. A year since Blackthorne had been tried and sentenced. A year since Julian walked into the Mercer boardroom and handed over his resignation not as a retreat, but as a statement. "We are not our bloodlines. We are what we choose when no one is watching." That evening, they hosted a quiet dinner at the foundation. Just a few friends, a few stories. Laughter came easily now. Later, standing by the window, Aria asked him, "Do you ever miss it? The power?" He considered the question, then shook his head. "I miss my father, or who I thought he was. I miss the idea that there was order in legacy. But no, I don't miss the throne." She looked at him, one eyebrow raised. "You still talk like a king sometimes." He smiled. "And you still translate my nonsense better than anyone." They stood there a long time, watching the city breathe. Down below, a neon billboard still glowed with Mercer's logo. But the slogan had changed. Not ambition, not dominance, just one word: accountability. The next morning, the press asked Aria if she planned to return to corporate life full-time after the baby. She smiled and said, "We've built enough. Now we protect it." They asked Julian if he was done with business for good. He laughed. "For good, no. But for now, I'm finally home." 1 year later, Mercer held a ceremony, not to celebrate profits or expansions, but to honor whistleblowers and truth-tellers across the world. The keynote speaker was a survivor of a Southeast Asian scam ring that Mercer had unknowingly enabled 2 decades ago. Her final words rang clear. "Justice isn't loud. It's not always clean, but it rises. Just like truth, it rises, even when buried, even when burned. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Julian and Arya stood quietly behind the stage. Their child, a girl, would be born in 2 months. "What do we name her?" Julian asked. Arya smiled. "Mako." The wind picked up softly, carrying the name out into the world. And far above the city, in the tallest remaining office of Mercer Tower, the sun finally reached the last pane of glass. No more shadows, only light. Thank you for watching this long and emotional series at Enon Stories. This is a journey not only about the corporate conspiracy or powerful shots, but the story of the choice between the past and the future, between silence and truth, between revenge and forgiveness. If you are Julian or Arya, when standing between power and truth, what would you choose? Forgiveness, silence, or continuing to unmask the world? Leave your comments below to share your feelings. I really want to read each one. If you find this series deserves, do not forget to click like, share and subscribe to Enon Stories channel to support the next episodes. The new video will be periodically broadcast here, and I will have more attractive series waiting for you ahead. Thank you again for accompanying this story until the last moment. See you again in the next series.